Now if you look at another verse in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that women have the same rights. And it begins with women, because men forget that. وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ. Allah could have said, وَلَهُمْ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِمْ. And men have the same rights that they have in responsibility. But He said women because men often forget that we are actually spiritually equal before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are spiritually equal. There is not spiritual superiority to a male over a female. That both of them have spiritual equality before God, and then it becomes who does better deeds. If the woman does better deeds, she's better than the man. If the man does better, he's better than the woman. It's as simple as that, and that's something that Allah tends to know, and we have to be careful about that. And that's why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, He says, bil ma'roof. This is with ma'roof. In all those good things that we're meant to do, we're meant to make sure that males and females respect each other. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. And this is where all the problem comes. One of the things about the Quran is a book, if it is studied without fiqh and without ta'wil, without an understanding of it. And that's why, what did the Prophet ﷺ say when he asked Ibn Abbas, he made the dua for Ibn Abbas, Allahumma faqihhu fi din wa allimhu ta'wil. Oh Allah, give him understanding in the religion and teach him how to interpret the Quran. Now Ibn Abbas was asked about this verse, and what did he say? He said, it is darajatu tanazul. It is the degree of giving up your rights. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. What that means is men have a degree over women in that men are told by Allah to give all of your rights to them, but don't demand all of your rights from them. That is the understanding of Ibn Abbas. And Ibn Abbas is somebody that said, إِنِّي لَأُحِبُّ أَنْ أَتَزَيَّنْ لِإِمْرَأَتِي كَمَا أُحِبُّ أَنْ تَتَزَيَّنَ لِي. I love to prepare myself by hygiene and presentation in the same way I love my wife to do that for me. There's men that expect their wife to look beautiful, and then they're walking around, unfortunately now with their 3-day growth, and instead of having a nice beard, and then expecting also women to maintain the house in a certain way that basically serves the man. And the point of Ibn Abbas is, no, I like to do for my wife the same things I like her to do for me. And that creates this parity in the home. But what Ibn Abbas is saying, if push comes to shove, I'm the one that gets pushed and she's the one that shoves. You see, if push comes to shove, I mean, that's something we forget. And this is why in the hadith of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, when the man came to complain about his wife to Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he came up to the door and he knocked, and then he heard the wife scream at Sayyidina Umar, said something to him, and he thought, he's in a bad situation as I am. And he started to leave. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu opened the door, and he said to this man, what did you want? He said, nothing. He said, Unshiduka billah, I'm asking you by Allah, you came to my house, tell me what you came for. He said, I came to complain about my wife, but I saw that you have the same problem, so I figured I might as well go home. And Sayyidina Umar said, this is my wife. Hadihi zawji, or zawjati. Zawji is, if it's understood that you use the masculine, which is also an interesting point. When you don't need to differentiate, you use the masculine form because males and females are ultimately language. The differentiation is about clarity of thought. It is not about preference. And that's why when you say a pregnant woman, you say hamil. You don't say hamila, because only women get pregnant. So you don't need to say hamilatun. It's understood when I say hiya hamil, that she's pregnant, you don't need to use the feminine. And that's another thing that Muslims forget. And that's why in the Quran, whenever the masculine is used, it is understood that the feminine is implied. And this is something, I was in a philosophy class at the university, and the professor demanded that we use non-biased sexual language. And I asked him what that meant, and he said that you say he, she, or she, he, or you give equal amount of he's to your she's in the paper. I just said to him, why do we need to do that? He said, because it's biased language. And I said to him, well, what about the genetic code? And he said, what do you mean? I said, it's a language, and this is a true story. I said this in class. I said, well, if you look at the genetic code, a male has X and Y. In other words, a male contains the female and the male chromosomes. But the woman only contains the female chromosomes. So the masculine, therefore, contains the male and the female, but the feminine only contains the feminine. So I said, is nature being biased in its genetic coding? Should we splice all of our genes so that we equalize it all? And that's the type of reductionist madness that we go into when we try to do this. That languages are very logical. And so in the Arabic language, if you say there's a group there, and there's one man and 30 women, you would use the masculine. Which is not to say that the one man is preferred over. No, it's that it's inclusive of both. Whereas with the female, you go to the female only. And that's the language of the Quran. And so we should reject this kind of attempt at creating a type of semantic madness that a lot of people are falling into. I mean, unfortunately, the British have really resisted that. It's something that's very peculiar to the United States. The British have resisted it because they don't feel like rewriting their language. They have a lot of literature, and they don't feel that it's necessary to do that. Sayyidina Umar said, this is my zawj. She keeps my house. She raises my children. She takes care of me. Shouldn't I have patience? Shouldn't I have some patience with her? In other words, that's the whole point. Try doing her job. And that's what my wife always says to me. She says, just take the boys for 5 hours. Because we have 4 boys, and she just says it. Just take them for 5 hours. That's all. And then we can talk. In other words, don't think that this is an easy job looking after these boys. And that's what we as men have to realize. This is the spiritual advantage. There's a disadvantage in the material, but there is an advantage in the spiritual, and we prefer the spiritual over the material. And that is why if you set up the track, the man is getting that head start because he's spiritually disadvantaged. Because a woman who's taking care of her children and her house has the maqam of a mujahid fi sabilillah. That's according to the hadith. The woman came to the Prophet, she's called Khatibat al-Arab, an Ansariya. She came, it's in Sahih Bukhari. And she began to speak, and the women, and was from their intelligence, they chose the most eloquent of all the women they had to go. She was an official delegate sent to speak on behalf of the women of Medina. And when she gave her khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ looked and he said, what do you think of this woman? They said, subhanallah, we didn't even have that realization. Because women in that society did not give khutbah. And so what they were so impressed with was her ability to speak in front of an audience of strangers. Because that is what oration is you're speaking, and it takes a type of courage that many people are intimidated by. And that's why in this culture they say that public speaking is a greater fear than death for some people. Just actually getting